skyscrapers in a metropolis after midnight. Among numerous office buildings, only the light in the president's office on the top floor of Leighton Hotels continued to quietly shine. At that hour, when the hustle of the high-rise district had settled, the solitary light seemed to float in the night sky. Michael Leighton was at his desk with the city's nightscape behind him through the large window. On his desk were piled stacks of complex acquisition contracts. Why did my father leave such chaos behind? Michael rubbed his tired eyes and sighed. It had been 10 years since he lost his father at the age of 30. Since then, he had worked ceaselessly to fully grasp control over Leighton Hotels, fighting day and night. After his father's death, the 15% of shares inherited by his stepmother, Catherine, had always been a source of instability in management. During board resolutions, Catherine consistently opposed Michael's proposals. New hotel construction plans and renovation proposals for existing hotels all faced difficulties due to her opposition. Michael stood up and walked to the window. Reflected in the glass, he saw a trace of his mother. He was the same age of 40 as his mother was when she died in an accident. Since losing his mother and sister that day, Michael's life had drastically changed. If only my father hadn't been driving that day. But such assumptions were meaningless. Reality couldn't be changed. However, the fact that his father remarried just a year after his mother's death left a deep wound in his heart at 16. Since then, Michael had avoided expressing his emotions. Michael looked away from the acquisition contracts piled on his desk and gazed at the ceiling. London, Paris, Dubai, Singapore, managing the globally spread Leighton Hotels was now like walking a tightrope. Suddenly, Michael picked up an old fountain pen handed down from his father. It was a gift from his mother to his father. Staring at the ink-stained pen, Michael recalled his childhood memories. His mother always used to sit him and his sister on her lap at dusk and sing to them. The lullabies sung in her clear voice still lingered deep in his heart. Yet, those peaceful days were lost in a moment. Michael took an old photo from his desk drawer. It was the last family photo taken with his mother and sister, showing their smiling faces. Looking at the photo, a rare flicker of emotion appeared in his eyes. Michael's heart was covered in a dark shadow. Following his father's death, he had tried to prove his worth by becoming a perfect manager. Suppressing his emotions and making decisions based solely on reason, that was the way of life he had chosen. The lights on the office floor had long been turned off, and the secretaries had long gone home. The only sounds in the late-night president's office were the low noise of the air conditioning and occasionally a car engine passing in the distance. These lonely late-night hours had become his routine. Michael poured cold water from a pitcher on his desk into a glass and took a sip. Though his physical thirst was quenched, his emotional thirst remained. He began to look through the documents again, calmly, without emotion. That had been his method for many years. However, in the depths of his eyes, an unnoticed loneliness lurked. On the top floor at midnight, Sarah Collins quietly moved along the corridor, changing cleaning supplies. Night shift cleaning staff usually finish their work by midnight, but tonight was an exception. A thorough cleaning of the conference room was needed for an important board meeting scheduled for the next day. As she carefully wiped the large glass windows, Sarah was captivated by the night view of the high-rise district, a scene she could never see during the day. The stars twinkled faintly between the buildings. "I wish I could show this view to my brother Will," Sarah murmured in her heart. Her youngest brother, turning 18, had always been interested in her workplace. The night view from the top floor of a luxury hotel would surely be a great inspiration for Will, who aspired to be a musician. After finishing cleaning the large conference room, Sarah started the final task of mopping the floor. In the silence, only the sound of the mop echoed. Her night shift colleagues had already moved to lower floors, leaving her alone on this floor. Suddenly, a nostalgic melody came to mind. A song she had sung in the choir during high school. During her high school days, she had participated in the state competition with this song and even received a music scholarship offer. However, after her mother's death, she had to give up her dreams to support her family. Unconsciously, Sarah began to sing softly. When the night falls and stars appear. Her clear, beautiful voice blended into the quiet space. Singing had always been a support for her heart. No matter how tired she was, humming a song soothed her soul. Michael, who had been reviewing documents in the president's office, paused when he heard the singing from the hallway. The voice brought back nostalgic memories. 25 years ago. The lullaby his mother used to sing. Michael instinctively stood up from his chair. Like a whisper from the past, the voice deeply resonated with his heart. The memory of that peaceful night before his mother's accident vividly returned. Michael went out into the hallway, drawn to the sound of the singing. The voice was coming from the conference room. When he opened the door, there stood a young woman, singing with a cleaning tool in her hand, illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the window. Her profile, lit by the moonlight, felt warmly familiar. Sarah, startled by the noise, abruptly stopped singing and turned around. Standing there was the president, Michael Layton, a man she never expected to see. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize." Sarah hurriedly apologized, but Michael said nothing. His expression lacked its usual coldness. Instead, there was a softness as if lost in a distant memory. "That song." Michael cut off his words. He didn't even know what he wanted to say. But along with a deep nostalgia, a warm sensation filled his chest. "Excuse me." Sarah quickly left the room with her cleaning tools. Even after her footsteps faded away in the corridor, Michael stood still for a while. Alone in the moonlit conference room, the memory from 25 years ago and the song he had just heard overlapped in his heart. The next morning, in the Layton Hotel's executive conference room, Michael sat at the far end of the long table, receiving the gaze of 12 board members. The meeting, which started first thing in the morning, had already lasted 3 hours. "Mr. Layton, do you understand our concerns?" The oldest board member continued, worry etched into his deeply wrinkled face. "Our company has a 100-year history since its founding. We have earned trust from customers worldwide because of the family management values built by generations of managers. However, the current situation with no clear successor is causing anxiety among our shareholders." Michael silently looked down at the documents. Spread out on the table was a graph showing the stock price trend. In recent years, the stable stock price had begun to show a gentle downward trend. The presence of Mrs. Catherine Layton also destabilizes management. Her 15% share could fall into the hands of hostile forces at any time. If that happens, the Layton family's control over the business could be jeopardized. Another director pointed out, while showing a document with numbers written on it. Despite feeling a sense of disgust internally, Michael responded without changing his expression. "I will present a concrete plan within 3 months." Michael answered calmly, yet his voice betrayed a hint of fatigue. As the meeting ended and the directors left the room, the oldest director stayed behind with Michael. "Michael, your father always had your happiness at heart. You are trying too hard to be a perfect executive. Sometimes, it's necessary to show some human weakness." The elderly director smiled kindly and slowly left the room. Left alone, Michael stood by the window, reflecting on the events of the previous night. That singing voice. The visage of his mother. And the profile of the cleaning staff illuminated by the moonlight. These memories oddly soothed his mind. However, Michael was quickly pulled back to reality. A pile of documents for that afternoon's meeting awaited him on his desk. There was no time to indulge in sentimentality. He sighed deeply and sat down. In the Layton residence, located in a high-end residential area, Michael sat in front of the fireplace, swirling ice in his glass. He had been reading the board meeting documents until moments ago but couldn't concentrate. The song from the other night lingered in his mind. "James." Michael called out, and the butler appeared immediately. James, 62, had served the Layton family for over 30 years. Since Michael was a child, he had watched over various family events. Since his mother was alive, He had shared in the family's joys and sorrows as a trusted butler. "Can I help you with something?" "Recently, at the hotel late at night, I saw a cleaning staff member." Michael continued, choosing his words carefully. "I'd like you to look into her." James narrowed his eyes for a moment at this unusual request. It was highly unusual for his master to show interest in a specific individual. "What is her name?" "Her name is Sarah Collins. She should be working as a night shift cleaning staff member." The flames in the fireplace flickered, casting shadows over Michael's profile. James sensed something unusual in his master's demeanor. "I understand. But..." James paused, then continued cautiously. "It will involve a detailed investigation of personal information." "Is that all right?" "It's fine. I want to know everything: her background, family relations, current living situation," Michael said, surprised at his own intense interest. Was it mere curiosity, or something else? "Understood," James said, and was about to leave the room when he stopped at the door. "If you don't mind my asking." "What is it? Did this person make a special impression on you?" Michael stared into the flames of the fireplace and did not answer for a while. Finally, in a soft voice, he said, "Her singing voice. It reminded me of my mother." At those words, James's eyes moistened slightly. It had been 25 years since the accident, and Michael seldom spoke of his mother. "Your mother had a truly wonderful voice," James reminisced, closing his eyes as if lost in deep memory. "I will proceed with the investigation." As James left the room, silence returned to the study. Michael stood up and looked at a family photo hanging on the wall. It showed him at age 15, his mother, and his young sister. His mother's gentle smile in the photo overlaid with the singing from that night. The following week, in the study of the Layton residence, James reported his findings while looking at the documents in his hand. Michael sat quietly by the fireplace, listening attentively. Sarah Collins, 30 years old, was born as the eldest of 6 siblings. James explained meticulously. 18 years ago, when Miss Collins was 12, her mother passed away from illness. At that time, her youngest brother was only 6 months old. Michael's expression changed slightly. Losing his mother at 15 resonated with the experience of a 12-year-old girl losing hers. Her father works as a construction worker, but his income is not stable. After their mother's death, Miss Collins supported the family by working various part-time jobs alongside her studies. James pulled out an old newspaper clipping. In high school, she excelled in the choir, winning the solo category at the state competition. She received scholarship offers from several universities. Why didn't she pursue her studies? For her family. She gave up her education to provide for her younger siblings' schooling. Michael stood up and walked to the window, contemplating the heavy responsibilities borne by a 12-year-old girl as he looked out into the night garden. What is her current situation? During the day, she works at a local supermarket, and at night, as a hotel cleaning staff. She juggles 2 jobs to support her family and is helping her youngest brother with his college education. And her brother? William Collins, commonly known as Will, is 18 years old. Blessed with musical talent, he is aiming to audition for music college next year. James paused momentarily, looking meaningfully at Michael. It seems she harbors a desire to entrust her brother with the dreams she had to give up. Michael was staring at his reflection in the window. The pain of losing his sister and the strength Sarah has shown in protecting her family resonated strangely within him. How is she regarded? The hotel staff hold her in very high regard. She is responsible and meticulous in her work, and she is deeply trusted by her colleagues. What stood out particularly was, James continued as he flipped through the documents. Despite not leading a life of ease, she consistently donates to charity every month. She continues this support for people in need in honor of her late mother, who often made donations herself. Michael turned around abruptly. Charity? Yes. Her mother was known for her charitable efforts, and she is continuing that legacy. Michael gazed at a photograph of his mother on his desk. His mother was also deeply involved in charity work, a kindness that remained a warm memory in Michael's heart. Anything else? Yes. She has a special routine. Every Sunday afternoon, she volunteers to sing at a local senior center. The residents look forward to her performances. Michael returned to the fireplace and sat down quietly. The light from the flames cast flickering shadows across his face. James. Yes? She lives in a world quite different from ours, doesn't she? There was an indescribable mix of admiration and awe in his voice. Indeed, her circumstances are vastly different. However, James chose his words carefully as he continued. There might be surprising commonalities in the essential parts of life. The death of a mother, a strong dedication to family, solace through music. Michael silently picked up his glass, swirling the amber liquid before slowly sipping it. In a small conference room at the top floor of Leighton Hotels, Sarah sat nervously in her chair, wondering about the reason for her summons. Could she be reprimanded for her singing late at night? The door opened, and Michael Leighton entered. His suit was impeccably pressed, as usual, but his expression bore something different. Thank you for waiting. Michael sat down quietly, placing his hand on the documents on the table. Miss Collins, I have called you here today for a special reason. Sarah inhaled sharply and nodded silently. Let me get straight to the point. I would like to ask you to be a surrogate. Startled by the unexpected request, Sarah's eyes widened. Michael continued to explain calmly. For the stability of Leighton Hotels management, a successor is needed. However, I have no plans to marry. Thus, I've considered surrogacy as an option. Sarah was speechless, studying Michael's expression to discern if this was real or some absurd joke. Of course, you will be well compensated. Michael handed her a document showing a staggering amount of money. Sarah gasped. With that amount, she could definitely ensure her brother Will's admission to music college. It was enough to repay the debts accumulated over the years for her siblings' education. This is. Sarah's voice trembled. These are my terms. During the contract period, you will live at Leighton Estate. All medical and living expenses will be covered by me. After giving birth, your position at this hotel will also be guaranteed. Michael continued to explain matter-of-factly. Why me? Sarah finally managed to ask, and Michael looked down momentarily. Your singing reminded me of my mother. At his words, Sarah looked up sharply. I lost my mother in an accident when I was 15. Michael's voice shook slightly. And you, at 12. We have similar experiences. A warm feeling spread through Sarah's heart. Inside this cold executive, there was a boy with experiences similar to her own. I need some time to think. Sarah spoke quietly. Michael nodded and handed her his business card. You have 48 hours. Once you've made your decision, contact me directly on my mobile. Sarah walked out of the hotel with unsteady steps. As she walked through the evening city, swirling thoughts about the life-changing sum of money mingled in her mind. Notably, it could fulfill Will's dream. Returning home, Sarah climbed the stairs of the old apartment building. From beyond the open door, the sound of piano practice drifted out. I'm home. In the small living room doubling as a bedroom, Will sat at the electronic piano. The second-hand piano, which had a few non-working keys, never drew complaints from kind-hearted Will. Sarah sat wearily on the old sofa. On the wall, a photo showed her bedridden mother holding baby Will, capturing the entire family. Her mother's final wish was, fulfill the children's dreams. Is that piece for the competition? Yes. But it's hard to express the finer details on this instrument. Will looked at the electronic piano with a sense of regret. If only he could practice on a real piano, his expression would broaden significantly. Sarah always felt a pang of pain knowing that her brother's talent was constrained by their circumstances. Sarah took out her smartphone and opened the website for the music university. As she stared at the tuition fees displayed on the screen, she recalled Michael's proposal from earlier that day. A chance to let Will's talent flourish. But at the same time, it was a significant decision to become a surrogate. In a private room of a high-end restaurant, Catherine Layton elegantly tilted her wine glass. Her refined beauty, unmarred by her 45 years, attracted the gazes of those around her. Sitting across the table was the HR director of Layton Hotels. "Thank you for the truly interesting information," Catherine said with a perfect smile. The HR director nervously glanced around and lowered his voice to continue. "Cleaning staff Sarah Collins has been moved to live and work at Layton Estate as of yesterday. A special contract has been drafted for her." A sharp light flickered in Catherine's eyes. After inheriting 15% of the shares following her husband's death 24 years ago, at age 21, these shares were her only weapon and pride. "Michael has a woman living at the estate? Interesting." Catherine took out her smartphone and checked Sarah's photo. 30 years old. Cleaning staff. Eldest of 6 siblings. There had to be a significant reason hidden behind her simple profile. "I heard that the issue of succession was raised at the recent board meeting." The HR director spoke even more quietly. Catherine sighed lightly and looked out the window. The skyscrapers were bathed in the orange glow of the sunset. "Tell me about the past." "About Michael's mother." Taken aback by the sudden question, the HR director showed a moment of confusion. "Mrs. Elizabeth Layton? She died in an accident 25 years ago." "Yes." "She was a good singer, wasn't she?" "Yes, she often sang at charity concerts." "She had a clear, beautiful voice." Catherine smiled meaningfully, sensing the pieces coming together. After leaving the private room, Catherine got into her car and directed the driver to her home. Her mansion in an upscale neighborhood epitomized the Layton family's wealth. Upon entering her study, Catherine immediately called her lawyer. "Can you check the bylaws of Layton Hotels for me? Especially the clauses regarding inheritance." After hanging up, Catherine looked at a photograph of her husband on the wall. Her husband, already middle-aged when they married, had left her a substantial fortune. Now, however, her position was being threatened. "Michael, a surrogate pregnancy, huh?" Catherine elegantly settled onto an expensive leather chaise lounge. Michael's actions were clearly aimed at securing a successor. If he had a child, her position and the value of her shares, as well as her influence within the company, would all be significantly weakened. But there is still time. Catherine picked up her smartphone again and began carefully reading about Sarah Collins. Her family structure, economic status, and her youngest brother's musical talent. There it is, a vulnerability. "No one will take my position from me." Catherine smiled contentedly as she envisioned the outcome of the game she was about to set in motion. In the east wing of Layton Estate, the room prepared for Sarah overflowed with a level of elegance she had never seen before. Cream-colored wallpaper, antique furniture, and a large window with a view of the well-maintained garden. James escorted Sarah, carrying a small trunk, to her room. "If there is anything you need, please do not hesitate to ask." "Thank you, but this room is too much for someone like me." Sarah expressed her bewilderment. James smiled kindly. "I will support you until you get accustomed to life here." At 62, the butler had already discerned Sarah's pure nature. Rather than viewing her stay in the mansion as a privilege, she seemed to perceive it as a duty. That evening, James was reporting to Michael in the study. "Miss Collins' belongings have been moved in. Her regular medical examinations will start tomorrow." Michael nodded silently. "There is something slightly concerning." James chose his words carefully. "Miss Collins has requested to have her meals in her room. She seems overwhelmed by the size of the mansion." Michael turned away from the window. "I see. I will speak to her tonight." This response pleased James, who in over 30 years of service had never seen Michael make such an effort to reach out personally. At dinner time, 3 places were set in the vast dining room. When Sarah entered, Michael and James were already seated. "Please, do not hesitate to sit down." Encouraged by James, Sarah took her seat with a nervous demeanor. A splendid course meal was laid out on the table. In the midst of a heavy silence, Sarah quietly began to hum Amazing Grace. Michael looked up upon noticing that song. Sarah immediately stopped humming. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It just came out. Don't worry about it. Amazing Grace, it's a nostalgic song for me. My mother used to sing it when she was in the hospital." At those words, Michael's expression softened. "My mother also loved this song. I remember she often sang it on Sunday afternoons." The words trailed off, but in that moment, a strange empathy emerged between the two. James, serving them, watched this warmly. Days passed, and life at Leighton Estate began to change gradually. In the mornings on the terrace, Sarah could be seen feeding the birds. And little by little, her presence began to change the atmosphere of the entire mansion. "It's strange, isn't it?" One morning, while tending the garden, James spoke softly to Michael. "What is?" "The birds have returned. It's been since the lady of the house was here." Michael looked up silently. Indeed, there were more birds in the garden. "Sarah is like a ray of light," James continued. "She is slowly bringing warmth back to this mansion, and to young Master's life." Michael did not respond, but even during his work in the study, he found himself increasingly listening to Sarah's singing coming from the garden. About 2 months later, in the study at Leighton Estate, Michael awaited a report from the chief physician with Sarah also present, quietly anticipating the results. "Congratulations. The pregnancy has been confirmed." The room's atmosphere tensed for a moment at the physician's words. Sarah unconsciously placed her hand on her abdomen, and Michael, while trying to maintain his usual composure, allowed a slight relaxation in his expression. "The progress is smooth. We will continue with regular checkups to monitor more closely." A few weeks later, on the day of the second ultrasound, the doctor furrowed his brow as he faced the monitor. "This is..." The doctor stared intently at the screen, then smiled broadly. "Mr. Leighton, Miss Collins, it appears you are having twins." "Twins." Sarah's voice trembled. Michael momentarily lost his words. "Yes, both are developing well." As the doctor continued explaining, Michael's mind was filled with complex thoughts. His plan for a single heir had unexpectedly turned into something much more. After the examination, the two walked in the garden. The spring breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. Twins were unexpected, weren't they? Sarah spoke quietly. Michael stopped and looked at the roses in the flower bed. "My mother used to say, twice the life, twice the blessing." At Michael's words, Sarah looked up, surprised. Those words made Sarah's heart warm. The cold beginning of their contract for surrogacy was slowly turning into something else. However, in these peaceful days, a new shadow was looming. Catherine already knew about this unexpected development, the birth of twins. In the dean's office at the Music University, Catherine elegantly lifted her teacup. The sunlight streaming through the window made her diamond ring sparkle. "Have you considered the matter of William Collins?" The dean nervously glanced at his documents. "Mrs. Leighton, his talent is undeniable. His audition received very high marks." "Yes, I know he is talented." Catherine continued with a calm smile. "However, we are currently considering revising our annual donations. The support from the Leighton Foundation is significant for your school, isn't it?" The dean's expression clouded. Satisfied, Catherine stood up and looked out at the campus spread before her. That evening, Sarah received a call from her brother in her room at Leighton Estate. She listened to his distraught voice. "Sarah, my scholarship was suddenly revoked." "What?" "I don't know why. And my conditional acceptance into the music department has also been withdrawn." Sarah slumped into her chair. Will's musical talent was recognized by everyone. Why had this sudden situation arisen? I could use my savings. But that's for the twins. Will's voice shook. Sarah had intended to save a part of her surrogate compensation for the twins, a responsibility she felt deeply. Don't worry, it's okay. Sarah tried to sound cheerful, but her voice was strained. After hanging up, as she stared out the window, Sarah felt utterly lost. Then, a knock sounded. Excuse me. James entered quietly, holding an envelope in his hand. This just arrived. It's registered mail for you, Miss Collins. Inside the envelope was an eviction notice from the landlord of her apartment, demanding a sudden and substantial increase in rent. It was an amount Sarah's family could not afford. Why? Sarah's voice trembled. In just one day, everything seemed to be crumbling. Meanwhile, in the study, Michael was reviewing documents when he heard a noise from the hallway. Opening the door, he found Sarah leaning against the wall. Miss Collins? Looking up, Sarah's eyes glistened with tears. I'm sorry. I just felt a bit dizzy. When Michael approached, thinking Sarah was just feeling ill due to early pregnancy, a piece of paper fell from her hand. It was a notice of eviction. Before Michael could finish reading the letter, Sarah began to speak quietly about her brother's scholarship issue, the sudden eviction notice, and her family's anxiety. Someone is trying to manipulate our lives. Michael's expression hardened. He recognized this tactic. Catherine. As he uttered the name, the phone in the study rang. Catherine's sweet voice flowed from the receiver. Michael, I have something to discuss. Can we meet tomorrow? Michael glanced at Sarah for a moment. She was standing, cradling her abdomen with both hands. A surge of emotion welled up inside him. Catherine, is this what you're doing? Oh, the Collins matter? Business sometimes affects people in unexpected ways. Stop it. If it's about terms, I'm open to discussion. For instance, if you terminate your contract with her. Michael hung up the phone and sighed deeply, turning to face Sarah. Don't worry. I will resolve this. His words lacked their usual coldness. Instead, they carried a strong determination. Sarah nodded silently. Yet, even in that moment, her heart was tumultuous. Was her decision endangering her family's lives? Such fears tightened around her heart. That night, unable to sleep, Sarah stood by the window, gazing at the moonlight pouring over the garden. She placed her hand on her abdomen. There were indeed 2 small lives there. Feeling their warmth, Sarah quietly shed tears. Yesterday, there was a call from her father. They needed to find a new place to live. Jobs at the construction site had been scarce recently. Her family's livelihood was being slowly cornered. Is my choice causing everyone pain? In the moonlit garden, a small bird was building a nest. Desperately carrying twigs, it was constructing a precious home. Sarah saw her mother's memories reflected in this scene. Sarah, sometimes you are forced to make tough choices. But always choose what your heart feels is right. Her mother's words from her sickbed remained vivid in her mind. As dawn broke, Sarah had made up her mind. At breakfast, she requested a meeting with Michael. Waiting in the study, Michael entered. Concern was evident on his face. I have something to tell you. Sarah looked straight at Michael. I will honor the contract. I want to properly protect these children. Michael gasped. But what about your family? Family happiness is important. Sarah continued quietly. But that happiness shouldn't come from betraying others. Mr. Layton, I trust you. This contract must have a meaning. Michael was at a loss for words. The strength and purity of the woman before him moved him deeply. Had he ever felt such profound trust from anyone in his life before? I too. Michael searched for the right words. I too will protect you. Absolutely. His words were not merely a businesslike promise, they sounded like a heartfelt vow. At that moment, James knocked and entered. He smiled slightly upon seeing them. Miss, there has been a call from the Music University. Sarah turned in surprise. Last night, I took some steps. Michael began to explain quietly. I spoke directly to the university board about Will's talent. The scholarship matter will be reconsidered. Tears overflowed from Sarah's eyes. And about the new housing? No. Sarah shook her head gently. We'll manage that as a family. But for Will's dream, thank you truly. Those words made Michael feel a warmth in his chest. The woman before him wasn't seeking aid, she just wanted to protect her brother's dream. Sarah's decision and her pure trust began to thaw Michael's frozen heart. In a high-end hotel lounge, Catherine was elegantly enjoying her afternoon tea. Across from her sat Sarah, whose 4-month pregnant belly was not yet very noticeable. Sarah, I'm glad we could meet. Catherine smiled as she poured tea from a silver teapot. This is an informal discussion. Let's keep it between us and not tell Michael. Sarah nodded silently. She had been uneasy since receiving Catherine's sudden invitation the day before. I have a favor to ask of you. Catherine pulled a check from her expensive handbag. Sarah gasped. The amount written on it far exceeded what Michael had contracted with her. This is the price for breaking the contract. With this amount, you could change your entire family's life. In Sarah's heart, a fierce conflict had begun. Indeed, with this amount of money. But these children. As Sarah was about to speak, touching her abdomen, Catherine quietly interrupted her. Think about those children too. Being born as heirs to the Leighton estate will be a great burden. They won't be able to lead free lives. Various scenes flashed before Sarah's eyes. Will studying at a top music university, her siblings chasing their dreams, her exhausted father finally finding rest. But at the same time, she remembered Michael's changing expressions, his gaze growing softer, the occasional slight kindness, and above all, the two lives growing inside her. I would like your answer by tomorrow. Catherine slid the check across to Sarah, stood up, and gently placed her hand on Sarah's shoulder. Make the right choice. For your family. After Catherine left, Sarah's heart continued to be in turmoil. In the study at Leighton Estate, Michael stood by the window, watching the rain pour down in the garden, waiting for a call from Catherine. He had already heard about the secret meeting with Sarah the day before. The door opened. Excuse me. When he turned around, there stood Sarah, holding a check in her hand. Mr. Leighton, I need to talk to you. Sarah looked straight at Michael, determination in her eyes. Catherine gave me this. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she placed the check on the desk. Michael widened his eyes as he saw the amount. As compensation for breaking the contract. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. Considering my family, it was a tempting offer. Will, my other siblings, my father, it's enough to change all their lives. Michael gasped. Catherine had perfectly targeted Sarah's vulnerability. But I cannot do it. Amid the quiet sound of the rain, Sarah continued. My mother taught me two important things. One is that happiness cannot be bought with money. What's important is the warmth in your heart. Sarah took a deep breath before continuing. And the other is that keeping promises is a matter of personal pride. Breaking a promise for your own benefit is like denying your own worth. Michael gasped. I can't sell my heart for money. That would be betraying my beliefs. The promise I made to these children, and the promise I made with you, Mr. Leighton, are irreplaceable to me. Sarah gently placed her hand on her abdomen. These children are already my precious family. They are not something that can be discarded for money. A profound impact hit Michael's heart. And Sarah smiled slightly, almost shyly. I can see the kindness in you, Mr. Leighton. It's subtle but certainly changing. I want to witness that change with my own eyes. Michael was at a loss for words. Since losing his mother at 15, no one had ever understood him so deeply. Important things that money can't buy. My mother was right. Sarah tore the check in half, then tore it again, and continued until it was just small pieces of paper. This is my answer. Shreds of the check scattered across the desk, looking almost like snow. Why? Michael's voice trembled. How can you trust me so much? There's no reason. Sarah smiled gently. It's just what my heart tells me. And she looked out the window where the rain had stopped, and sunlight was beginning to shine through. I want to tell these children about the invaluable things in life that can't be measured with money. At that moment, something tightly wound inside Michael unraveled. It felt as if the warmth he had lost as a child was gradually returning. Sarah. For the first time, Michael called her by her name. Thank you. His words were laden with various emotions, gratitude, trust, and a budding new feeling. And Michael was certain. This was not just a contract. And Sarah was not just a surrogate mother. She was someone who had thawed his frozen heart and shown him a new light. In the employee lounge of Leighton Hotel, tension filled the air. The head of the cleaning department spread several photos on the table. The photos showed valuable items that had disappeared from a luxury suite. According to the security camera records, the last person to enter the room where the theft occurred was Sarah Collins. The manager's voice was heavy. Sarah stared at the photos in disbelief. I never. Her words trailed off. The eyes of her colleagues were suddenly all on Sarah. Furthermore, there's some interesting information. The manager pulled out a new document. Miss Collins has recently started living at the Leighton estate and has been receiving a substantial reward. Wait. A forceful voice interrupted. Mary, a veteran cleaner, stood up. Sarah would never steal. She is our pride. Mary continued with a trembling voice. Last year, when my daughter was hospitalized, Sarah gave up her own vacation time to cover for me. She always donates part of her salary to charity. That's right. Another staff member stood up. Sarah volunteers every Sunday at a senior center. Many people look forward to her singing. One after another, colleagues began to speak up. Last month, when I hurt my back, Sarah helped me out. She always comes to work earlier than anyone else and helps everyone with their tasks. The most thank you letters from guests are for Sarah. Suddenly, the room's door opened. Standing there was the guest who had reported the theft. I'm terribly sorry. The guest apologized deeply. My valuables were found in another one of my bags. I'm truly sorry for the misunderstanding. The manager's face turned pale. This is. At that moment, hurried footsteps were heard in the corridor, and the hotel's general manager entered the room holding an envelope. This complaint was received anonymously. The general manager said with a stern face. We have identified the sender. It has been determined to be a deliberate defamation. A sigh of relief escaped from Sarah's colleagues. However, Sarah's expression was tinged with sadness. Why would someone go to such lengths to frame her? The next day, Sarah was getting ready to leave the staff room. In her hand was a resignation letter. She did not want to cause any more trouble at her workplace. Then, there was a knock on the door. Opening it, there stood the general manager and about a dozen colleagues. Mary stepped forward, holding a petition signed by the staff. Sarah, we want to work with you. Everyone. You are our pride. So don't give up. The general manager said calmly. Miss Collins, losing an employee as honest as you would be a great loss for the hotel. Tears fell in large drops from Sarah's eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she tore up her resignation letter. Sarah thought to herself that she was not alone. Bonds that money can't buy truly exist here. Meanwhile, Catherine was receiving a phone call at her mansion about the failure of her plan. Her expression twisted momentarily, but she quickly regained her elegant smile. It's not over yet. In the executive boardroom of Leighton Hotels, Michael was quietly reviewing documents. Catherine was sitting gracefully, her usual confident expression on her face. Tension hovered among the board members. Today's agenda is about revising our company's management system. Michael began to speak. His voice carried an unprecedented strength. First, I will report on a series of incidents that have recently occurred. Displayed on the screen were various pieces of evidence attempting to frame Sarah. Pressure on the music university, the eviction notice from the apartment, and the recent fabricated theft at the hotel. Behind all these incidents was Catherine's shadow. This is personal retaliation. Catherine's expression stiffened. Michael, you are being too emotional. For a mere cleaner. Sarah Collins is not just any cleaner. Michael's voice echoed in the boardroom. She embodies the values of our hotel: integrity, dedication, and above all, decency as a person. A murmur arose among the directors. Furthermore, Michael continued. She refused a substantial sum offered to break her contract because she understands the value of keeping promises. She knows that breaking a promise for personal gain is the same as denying one's integrity. Color drained from Catherine's face. The senior director spoke up. Mrs. Layton, can you explain your actions? It's all for the company. To preserve the traditions of the Layton family. Catherine struggled to maintain her composure. However, your actions are jeopardizing the company's reputation. Michael spoke sternly. Members of the board, I have a proposal for you. Michael distributed new documents. I propose that the company buy back the 15% of shares owned by Mrs. Layton at a fair market price. The room fell silent once again. This is too aggressive. Catherine's voice trembled. No. Michael replied quietly but with a strong will. This decision is to protect the company and its people. The board overwhelmingly supported Michael's proposal. At that moment, Catherine's influence significantly wavered. 1 month before the birth, the Layton Estates garden was bathed in early summer sunlight. Sarah was resting on a bench in the rose garden during her routine walk. How are you feeling? Michael's voice came from behind. He was holding an album and a brown envelope. Yes, I'm well. The twins are very lively. Michael sat down next to Sarah. The scent of roses drifted on the breeze. I have something here I would like you to see. When Michael opened the album, an old photo appeared. A young Michael and his mother were smiling in this rose garden. Young Michael was showing an innocent smile on his mother's lap. My mother cherished this rose garden. Michael's voice was unusually soft. Every morning, she would sing while tending to the roses here. I loved listening to her singing. Sarah silently gazed at the photo, which showed a happy young boy, a version of Michael hard to imagine now. After my mother died, I shut my heart. I convinced myself that showing emotions was a weakness. Michael sighed deeply. But meeting you, everything started to change. Michael slowly opened the brown envelope and took out a document. Sarah gasped. It was the contract they had signed. We don't need this anymore. Michael quietly but decisively began tearing up the contract. The pieces fluttered in the early summer breeze. Sarah. Michael looked straight into Sarah's eyes. Initially, this was just a contract. We needed an heir. That was all. His words faltered. He slowly took Sarah's hand. But you have taught me something important. That there are things money can't buy. The importance of keeping promises. And the warmth of opening one's heart. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. Your singing voice brought back memories of my lost mother. And your very presence has slowly thawed my frozen heart. Michael gently placed his hand on Sarah's belly. These children are no longer just the product of a contract. They are a testament to our love. Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks. Sarah, I love you. Not as a part of a contract or out of obligation, but as a person, with all my heart. His confession was interrupted by Sarah's quiet sobbing. She simply nodded, overwhelmed with emotion. From beyond the rose garden, James watched the couple. Tears glimmered in the eyes of the old butler, who had served the house for over 30 years. He knew that a true spring was finally coming to the Layton family. In the middle of the night, in a hospital corridor, Michael stared anxiously at the red light above the operating room. Labor had started 2 weeks ahead of schedule, an unexpected turn of events. "Master." James quietly placed a hand on his shoulder. Michael's face was pale, his hands trembled. "My mother died in this hospital, too." His voice cracked. Memories of trauma from 25 years ago suddenly resurfaced. At that moment, a doctor emerged from the operating room. Michael caught his breath. "Mr. Layton, your first child, a girl, has been born safely." Tears appeared in Michael's eyes. And before the doctor could finish, the robust crying of a baby filled the air. "The second child, a healthy boy, is also doing well. Both mother and child are healthy." Michael's knees buckled. James quickly supported him. "Congratulations." The old butler's voice trembled. A few hours later, Sarah, moved to a private room, showed a tired but happy smile as the twins slept peacefully in their incubators. "Look," Sarah whispered softly. "The girl looks like your mother." Michael was reflecting on an old family photo. Indeed, his little child bore a soft expression similar to his mother's. "The boy. He looks just like you." The two shared a spontaneous smile. As dawn broke and sunlight began to stream through the window, Michael quietly knelt beside the bed and took Sarah's hand. "Sarah." His voice carried an emotion never heard before. "We are no longer just bound by contract or obligation. But there is still one thing I wish to ask of you." Sarah's eyes widened as Michael pulled a small box from his pocket. "Will you walk with me as the mother of these children and as my partner in life?" Inside the box was the engagement ring his mother had cherished. The simple solitaire diamond, timeless in its glow, symbolized an unchanging love, transcending 25 years. "This ring was very dear to my mother." Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks. "Yes." Her response was almost a whisper, yet it filled the room with profound sentiment. As Michael slid the ring onto Sarah's finger, the twins in the incubator seemed to wave their tiny hands as if to bless the moment. "Elizabeth and Michael." Sarah spoke softly. "These are the names for the twins. After your mother and after you." Michael was lost for words. A daughter carrying his mother's name, and a son bearing his own. These new lives bridged the past and the future. In the vast garden of the Layton estate, bathed in early summer sunlight, Sarah, in her wedding dress, clung to her father's arm. The hands of her father, a construction worker for many years, trembled gently, as if to bless his daughter's happiness. The twins are 3 months old. Elizabeth and Michael Jr. are being held by James as they watch their parents in their finest moment. "Today is the happiest day of my life." Michael declared his vows. Gone was any trace of his former coldness. "Sarah, you have taught me the true meaning of love. I want to walk through life with you." Tears sparkled in Sarah's eyes. Her bouquet included white lilies, her mother's favorite. After the vows and ring exchange, they moved to the reception venue where an unexpected announcement was made. A special gift for the bride and groom. A grand piano was brought onto the stage, and there stood Will, in a tuxedo. "Sarah, Michael." Will's voice quietly filled the venue. "With the highest respect and gratitude." As he began to play the piano elegantly, his clear voice layered over the music. After the performance, Will took the microphone. "My sister sacrificed her dreams for mine. Today, I have special news." The venue hushed. "Next month, I will be attending Juilliard School of Music, on a full scholarship." Sarah covered her mouth, her voice choked with emotion. "My sister has dedicated years for my sake. To repay her, I have worked my hardest and will continue to do so." Michael gently squeezed Sarah's hand, as tears of joy rolled down her cheeks. Late that night, after the reception, Sarah walked through the garden. Michael approached her under the moonlight, his expression serene. "Sarah, listening to Will, I thought." "Yes?" I want you to chase your dreams too. To become a singer. Sarah looked at him in surprise. But it's okay. We have plenty of time. Even if it's little by little as our children grow. Touched by Michael's words, Sarah smiled through her tears. In the Layton Estates greenhouse, Sarah tended to the plants with the twins' stroller beside her. Elizabeth and Michael Jr. enjoyed a peaceful nap in the sun. Excuse me. Startled, Sarah turned to find Catherine standing there. The once dignified figure now appeared weary. Catherine. Instinctively, Sarah stood protectively in front of the twins. Don't worry. Catherine's voice was unusually soft. I've just come to see you. A heavy silence fell between them. May I see the babies? Catherine's voice quivered slightly. Sarah hesitated for a moment but then nodded slowly. As Catherine peered into the stroller, Elizabeth woke up and showed a guileless smile. At that moment, Catherine's expression crumbled. I once wanted children myself, she confessed quietly in the greenhouse. But it never happened. That's why I clung to my marriage with Michael's father. Sarah listened in silence. In the end, I couldn't love or be loved. I just clung to status and power. A tear rolled down Catherine's cheek. These children, they're truly beautiful. Elizabeth reached out and grabbed Catherine's finger with her tiny hand. This pure gesture left Catherine speechless. I'm sorry, she finally broke down, her years of facade crumbling. For all I've done to hurt you, forgive me. Sarah slowly placed her hand on Catherine's shoulder. Let's accept the past as the past. Surprised by those words, Catherine looked up. But these children need a lot of love. And that includes a grandmother's love. Sarah's voice was warm and encompassing. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask you to babysit sometimes. At those words, Catherine cried again, but this time, they were tears of salvation. That evening, when Michael visited the greenhouse, he witnessed an unexpected scene. Catherine was holding Elizabeth, and Sarah was holding Michael Jr., talking quietly together. It's an unusual sight. James commented quietly from behind. Sarah's generosity might heal the wounds of this house. Michael nodded silently. Indeed, Sarah's presence was more than just a beloved wife, perhaps she was the salvation the house had needed. 2 years later. The Layton Estates rose garden sparkled under the early summer sun, adorned for the twins' second birthday. Elizabeth, with her mother's clear eyes, and Michael Jr., bearing his father's stately expression, received blessings from the guests. Everything's ready. James whispered to Michael as he stood beside him. In the center of the rose garden, a small stage had been set up. Will, honing his skills at Juilliard, was at the piano, surrounded by Sarah and her siblings. Ladies and gentlemen. Sarah began in a soothing voice. Today, for our beloved children's birthday, we have prepared a special gift. Will began to play a piano piece, a song once loved by Sarah's mother and cherished by Michael's mother. Sarah's crystalline voice filled the garden, harmonizing with her siblings, spreading warm melodies around. Michael's eyes welled up with tears. The memories of his mother singing in this very place blended with the current, beloved voices of his family. Time indeed brought healing. The twins danced innocently to the singing, watched over by Catherine and the Layton staff, all sharing gentle smiles. In these 2 years, so much has changed. Sarah spoke softly after the song. I've found a new family, and I'm slowly fulfilling my own dreams. Recently, Sarah began singing at charity concerts, healing many with her voice, encouraged by Michael. But what makes me happiest is, she continued, hugging the twins, that these children are growing up surrounded by so much love. Indeed, around Elizabeth and Michael Jr., there was an outpouring of unconditional love from their father's strength, their mother's kindness, Catherine's care, James's loyalty, and the warmth of many aunts and uncles. Mommy, Daddy. The twins ran over. Michael and Sarah embraced them, an image of familial warmth that James looked upon with profound relief. It all started with that song that day. Sarah whispered to Michael. Yes. You taught me the value of what's truly important. As the summer breeze carried the scent of roses, the party's gentle atmosphere lingered. Please keep singing. Upon hearing Michael's words, Sarah smiled softly. Yes, for our family, and for my own dreams. As twilight fell, her serene singing resumed, signaling the dawn of a new era filled with hope.